They gave Azalea Montgomery to the Comanche warrior like livestock changing hands. She stood in borrowed ceremonial dress outside Fort Esperanza, Texas, her spine straight as a rifle barrel despite the tremor in her fingers. Mayor Cornelius Blackwood's voice carried across the dusty space between two worlds. For lasting peace between our peoples. The words fell flat in the September heat. Azalea kept her eyes fixed on the horizon beyond the warrior's shoulder. Ayanna Tachawicka sat motionless on his painted horse, studying her with the patience of stone. His face revealed nothing. The feathers in his hair caught the wind. 3 days had passed since the town council sealed her fate. 3 days since she crouched outside their meeting hall, ear pressed to weathered wood, listening to civilized men discuss her future over tobacco and whiskey. "The raids have to stop," Blackwood had said. "We're bleeding cattle and crops." "A peace bride," suggested Thomas Hartwell, whose barn had burned. "Indians respect that sort of arrangement." Sarah Delacroix had spoken next. The words still burned in Azalea's chest. "She's the obvious choice. No real family here, no ties." Azalea's former friend, the woman she'd nursed through fever 2 winters back, the woman who'd borrowed her needle and thread more times than the desert had dust storms. No ties. Preacher Jeremiah Whitmore had taught Azalea to read in secret, Sunday mornings before dawn in the church basement. His silence during that vote cut deeper than any spoken betrayal. Knowledge was dangerous for a woman like her. Reading was power the wrong hands couldn't hold. The ceremony proceeded with mechanical precision. Blackwood presented gifts, blankets, tobacco, flour, Azalea. Ayanna accepted each offering with a slight nod. When Blackwood gestured toward her, something shifted in the warrior's expression. Not eagerness, not satisfaction. Something else entirely. He dismounted, approached, stopped 3 feet away, close enough for conversation, distant enough for dignity. "You saved Comanche, child, during last raid." His English carried the rhythm of his native tongue. "I saw." The memory surfaced through her anger. A boy, maybe 8 years old, clutching a bleeding arm behind the blacksmith's shop while chaos erupted around them. She'd torn strips from her petticoat, bandaged the wound, sent him running toward the trees. The other townspeople had been too busy protecting property to notice one small enemy. "Why does this matter?" "It matters." Blackwood cleared his throat. The sound scraped against the morning quiet. "Well then, it's settled. The arrangement stands." Arrangement. As if she were a business transaction, a cattle trade, a debt settlement. Ayanna returned to his horse and mounted in one fluid motion. He looked down at her, waiting. Not demanding, not commanding. Waiting. Azalea had learned to read the spaces. Between words, the silences that held more truth than speeches. This man could have simply taken what the town offered, could have treated her like spoils of war. Instead, he waited for her choice. She walked to the spare horse they'd brought for her, pulled herself into the saddle with movements sharp as breaking kindling. Her riding skills had improved during her time in Texas, born from necessity and stubborn determination. The townspeople watched from porches and doorways. Some faces showed relief, others held guilt they'd swallow with their next meal. Sarah Delacroix stood near the general store, one hand shading her eyes, the other twisted in her apron. Azalea met her gaze across the distance, held it until Sarah looked away. The horses turned toward Comanche territory, toward the unknown, toward whatever waited beyond the boundaries of Fort Esperanza's broken promises. Ayanna rode ahead, not beside her, giving her space to breathe, space to think, space to rage if she needed it. The sun climbed higher. The settlement shrank behind them until it became just another smudge on the vast Texas landscape. Dust rose. From their horses' hooves, a small cloud announcing their passage to anyone watching. Azalea had expected chains, expected brutality, expected the kind of treatment she'd known on the plantation before the war changed everything, before freedom became just another word that meant different things to different people. Instead, she found silence, respectful distance, a man who rode like he belonged to the land itself, moving with his horse rather than against it. Her anger remained, hot and sharp as a blade fresh from the forge, but confusion crept in around its edges. This wasn't the captivity she'd prepared for. This wasn't the fate she'd dreaded through 3 sleepless nights. The warrior who'd bought her peace with her freedom had noticed her kindness when her own people saw only convenience, had valued her mercy when they'd measured only her expendability. Ayana glanced back once. Their eyes met briefly across the space between their horses. He nodded slightly, then faced forward again. The gesture said more than the ceremony had, more than Blackwood's speeches, more than the townspeople's relieved whispers. It said, "You are here. You are seen. You matter." Azalea straightened in her saddle. The sun warmed her shoulders. The wind carried scents of sage and distant rain. Behind them, Fort Esperanza disappeared completely. Ahead, the horizon stretched endless and uncertain. Between them, a silence that felt less like ending and more like beginning. The Comanche camp rose from the prairie earth like something that had always belonged there. Hide lodges stood in careful circles, their surfaces painted with symbols that spoke languages Azalea couldn't read. Smoke drifted from cook fires carrying scents of sage and roasted meat. Eyes followed her arrival, some curious, others cold as winter stone. Ayana dismounted near the largest lodge. An elderly woman emerged, her silver hair braided with shells and beads. Sakyo-sama, bear woman. Her gaze swept Azalea from head to toe, measuring everything in seconds. The old woman spoke in rapid Comanche. Ayana responded quietly. A conversation about property, Azalea assumed, about where to put the new burden. Sakyo-sama gestured toward a smaller lodge, pointed at Azalea, spoke again, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to obedience. Ayana nodded. "You stay with grandmother. She teaches." "Teaches what?" "How to live." The words hung in the air between them. Azalea had survived slavery, survived freedom, survived the casual cruelties of people who called themselves civilized. She'd learned to live in places that didn't want her. But this felt different. This felt like earning rather than enduring. Sakyo-sama's lodge smelled of herbs and smoke. Buffalo hides covered the ground. Bundles of dried plants hung from lodge poles. The old woman pointed to a space near the back wall, then to a pile of blankets. Home, such as it was. The first days blurred together, hauling water from the creek, in vessels that seemed designed to punish weak hands. Scraping hides until her fingers cracked and bled. Learning to tend fires that demanded constant attention. Sakyo-sama spoke no English, communicated through gestures, grunts, and the occasional, sharp word when Azalea's efforts fell short. The old woman's patience had limits, but her expectations never wavered. Other women watched these lessons with varying degrees of interest. Some offered subtle help. Others made their disapproval known through meaningful looks and whispered conversations. Azalea understood. She was the outsider, the intruder, the woman who'd arrived through transaction rather than birth or choice. Ayana appeared at irregular intervals, never staying long, never explaining his absences. He'd check on her progress with Sakyo-sama, exchange a few words, then disappear again into the business of being a warrior. But he brought things. Softer blanket when the nights grew cold, moccasins that fit her feet properly, a wooden comb carved with intricate patterns, small kindnesses that spoke louder than words. The third week brought the buffalo hunt. Azalea watched from the lodge as riders prepared their horses, checked their weapons, sang songs that seemed older than the hills themselves. Ayana stopped, beside her. "You ride?" "Some." "Come." He led her to a gentle mare, dappled gray with intelligent eyes. The horse accepted her touch without fuss, as if Ayana had chosen carefully. "Why?" "You learn by doing, not by watching." The hunt moved, across the prairie like controlled thunder. Azalea stayed at the edges, watching the warriors work with their mounts in perfect harmony. Men and horses moving as single creatures, reading the buffalo's movements, anticipating their turns. A young boy rode too close to the herd. His horse stumbled. The child tumbled toward the hooves of a massive bull, panic written across his face. Azalea's body moved before her mind could interfere. She urged the mare forward, leaning low over the horse's neck. Her arm swept down, catching the boy around the waist, pulling him up and away from the stampeding animals. The mare carried them both to safety. The boy's father reached them first, his face pale with terror and relief. He took his son, checking for injuries, then turned to Azalea. Spoke words she couldn't understand but recognized anyway. "Thank you." That evening, the campfire burned brighter. Stories were told. Songs were sung. Azalea sat beside Sakyo-sama, no longer quite so alone. Ayana appeared out of the darkness, settled beside her on the ground, close enough for conversation, but not close enough to assume intimacy. "You saved Macoons, little bear." "Anyone would have." "No, not anyone." The fire crackled. Sparks rose toward stars that seemed close enough to touch. "Why did you choose me?" The question had burned in her chest for weeks. Ayana stared into the flames. "In your settlement, I watched. Learned your people's ways. Saw how they treated those they considered beneath them." He turned to meet her eyes. "You tended wounded child when others walked past. Showed mercy when you could have chosen indifference. That is the heart of a warrior. I'm not a warrior. White world taught you to hide your strength, told you survival meant making yourself small, invisible." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. Comanche world teaches different truth. Strength comes from knowing your place in the great circle, from understanding that courage serves the whole tribe, not just yourself. Azalea felt something shift in her chest. A recognition, a possibility she'd never allowed herself to consider. "I chose you because I saw warrior spirit they could not see, because mercy in the face of fear takes more courage than any battle." Sakyo-sama rose from her place by the fire, walked to Azalea, placed a weathered hand on her shoulder, spoke in Comanche, her voice carrying warmth Azalea hadn't heard before. Ayana translated. "She says you have the heart of her people, that courage shows itself in protection of the young." The old woman's hand squeezed gently. Then she returned to her place, leaving Azalea with the weight of unexpected acceptance. The fire burned lower. People began drifting toward their lodges. Ayana remained beside her, comfortable in the silence. "What happens now?" "Now you decide. Stay because you must, or stay because you choose to." "And if I choose to stay?" "Then you learn what it means to be truly free." The stars wheeled overhead. The prairie stretched endlessly in all directions. Azalea sat between two worlds, feeling the pull of something she'd never experienced before. Belonging. Not ownership. Not obligation. Not the desperate clinging of survival. Belonging. 3 months passed before Azalea realized she was home. The knowledge came quietly, settled in her bones without announcement. She woke one morning in Sakyo-sama's lodge and felt belonging where fear used to live. Her hands had grown strong from working hides. Her seat on horseback had found its natural rhythm. The Comanche words flowed easier now, shaped by understanding rather than desperation. Ayana had become her teacher in ways that mattered, not just language, but philosophy. The interconnectedness of all things, the responsibility that came with strength, the way leadership served rather than commanded. Their conversations happened in the spaces between daily tasks. While preparing arrows, he spoke of balance. While tending horses, he explained honor. While watching the stars, he shared the stories his grandfather had given him. Azalea found herself contributing. Her literacy skills proved valuable when traders brought documents, treaty papers written in the white man's language designed to confuse rather than clarify. She translated not just words but intentions, revealing the traps hidden in seemingly generous offers. "You see what they hide," Ayana said one evening, reviewing a particularly deceptive contract. "Your people taught you to read between the lines of survival. Your people now," she corrected quietly. He looked at her then, something shifting in his expression. Recognition, understanding, the acknowledgement of choice made and accepted. Their partnership deepened beyond duty or arrangement. Respect had grown into something more complex, more necessary. They moved around each other with the careful grace of people learning to trust. But not everyone embraced the change. Nahyosi watched his brother with increasing disapproval. Ayana's younger sibling had inherited their father's pride, but not his wisdom. He saw the growing bond between Ayana and Azalea as weakness, a distraction from the serious business of protecting their people. "She makes you soft," he said one morning, his words carrying across the camp like smoke from green wood. Ayana's response came quiet and measured. "She makes me see clearly. You spend more time teaching her than training warriors. Teaching her is training for leadership." The argument simmered beneath the surface of daily life. Other warriors watched, measuring loyalties, choosing sides in a conflict that hadn't yet declared itself openly. Meanwhile, news arrived from the white settlements. A cavalry officer named Colonel Marcus Drummond had reached Fort Esperanza with orders to pacify the Comanche. His methods, according to the traders, involved superior firepower and little patience for negotiation. Sarah Delacroix had apparently been busy spreading stories, tales of Azalea's capture, her suffering, her desperate need for rescue. The colonel had listened with the attention of a man seeking justification for actions already planned. Azalea learned this while grinding corn with the other women. The information came in fragments, pieces of gossip traded between tribes, rumors carried by friendly Kiowa who'd dealt with Drummond before. "He uses mercy as weakness," explained Ayanyi, Sakyo-sama's niece, "sees kindness as opportunity." That evening, Azalea shared the news with Ayana. They sat beside the creek that ran near the camp, water moving over stones, with the persistence of time itself. "He'll come," Ayana said simply. "What will you do?" "Protect my people. All of them." His hand found hers in the darkness. Not possessive, not claiming, but connecting. Two people facing uncertainty together. "I need to tell you something," Azalea began. The attack came before she could finish. War cries split the night air. Horses thundered into camp. But these weren't soldiers. These were Comanche, painted for battle, led by a warrior Azalea recognized. From gatherings between bands. Sinema, Swift Arrow, a war chief who'd argued against all treaties, all peace negotiations, all attempts at coexistence with the expanding white settlements. His target wasn't the entire camp. His focus narrowed. To one lodge, one family, one marriage he considered a betrayal of everything sacred. Ayana rose smoothly, his hand moving to his weapon. But this wasn't a fight he could win through superior skill. This was politics played with steel and horsehair. "Brother," Sinema called across the chaos, "you dishonor our people with this union. Return the woman to where she belongs. She belongs where she chooses." "Choice?" Sinema's laughter cut sharp as winter wind. "You speak of choice while our hunting grounds shrink? While soldiers gather at our borders? While treaties become lies before the ink dries?" The accusations carried truth that hurt more than insults. The white settlements were expanding. The military presence was growing. The pressure on Comanche lands increased with each passing season. And here was Ayana, their war leader, spending his energy on a woman from the very people pushing them toward extinction. The battle, when it came, was brief but decisive. Not meant to kill, but to capture. To prove a point. To demonstrate that Ayana's leadership had been compromised by misplaced affection. Azalea found herself fighting alongside people she'd grown to love. Her horsemanship skills, learned through necessity, now served to protect children as they fled toward safety. Her knowledge of the camp's layout helped guide families to defensible positions. But Sinema had planned carefully. His warriors knew exactly what they wanted and how to get it. When the dust settled, Azalea was gone. The last thing she saw was Ayana's face across the battlefield. No words passed between them, but understanding flowed clear as creek water. This separation wouldn't break what they'd built. Distance couldn't diminish what they'd chosen. Sinema had won the battle, but he'd misunderstood the war. Love wasn't weakness when it multiplied strength. Partnership wasn't distraction when it sharpened focus. As they rode toward Fort Esperanza, Azalea's hand moved to her belly, where new life grew in secret. The child would know both worlds, carry both strengths, bridge both peoples, if she lived long enough to tell them the story. The prairie stretched endless in all directions. Behind them, smoke rose from the Comanche camp. Ahead lay the white settlement that had traded her away like livestock. She was returning changed. They would see the difference immediately. The question was whether they'd understand what it meant, or try to force her back into the shape of their expectations. Azalea straightened in the saddle. The morning sun warmed her shoulders. The wind carried scents of sage and distant rain. She was going home, not to stay, but to choose. The difference mattered more than they could possibly know. Fort Esperanza looked smaller than memory suggested. The buildings seemed to have shrunk during her absence, their importance diminished by distance and perspective. Azalea sat straighter in the saddle as Sinema's warriors delivered her to the settlement gates. The townspeople gathered quickly. Word spread through the dusty streets that their peace bride had been rescued. They expected to find a broken woman, traumatized and grateful. Instead, they found someone transformed. Azalea's posture spoke of confidence earned rather than granted. Her clothes were Comanche, well-made and practical. Her hair was braided with beads that caught the morning light. She moved with the fluid grace of someone who belonged to herself. Mayor Blackwood stepped forward, his relief visible. "Miss Montgomery, thank the Lord you're safe." Azalea studied his face, reading the assumptions behind his words. Safe implied she'd been in danger. Rescued suggested she'd been held against her will. Both conclusions missed the truth entirely. "I was never unsafe," she said quietly. Colonel Marcus Drummond emerged from the mayor's office, his uniform crisp despite the Texas heat. He carried himself with the rigid bearing of a man accustomed to unquestioned authority. His eyes swept over Azalea, cataloging details, making assessments. "Miss Montgomery, I'm Colonel Drummond. I understand you've endured quite an ordeal. I've learned quite a lot." The distinction wasn't lost on him. His smile remained fixed, but something shifted behind his eyes. This wasn't the broken victim he'd expected to interview. They housed her in the same room she'd occupied before the ceremony. 4 walls and a window that looked out on the settlement's main street. The space felt cramped after months of prairie sky and lodge fires. Sarah Delacroix visited that first afternoon. She entered with careful steps, her expression mixing curiosity with guilt. The months had been kind to her. Marriage to merchant. William Prescott had brought comfort, status, security. "Azalea, you look..." She paused, searching for words. "Different." Yes, different. They sat across from each other, separated by more than the small table between their chairs. Sarah's hands twisted in her lap, betraying the nervousness her voice tried to hide. "I want you to know I thought it was for the best. The arrangement, the peace negotiations, we all thought... You thought I was expendable." The words hung in the air between them. Sarah's face flushed, but she didn't argue. Couldn't argue. The truth was too clear for comfortable lies. "You're angry." "I'm awake." Azalea stood, moved to the window. The street below bustled with familiar rhythms. People going about their business, secure in their routines, protected by walls and assumptions. "What was it like?" Sarah asked quietly. "With them? I learned what it means to be valued. But surely you're glad to be back? To be safe among your own people." Azalea turned from the window, looked at Sarah with eyes that had seen beyond the settlement's boundaries, beyond its limitations. These aren't my people anymore. Colonel Drummond's interrogation began the next morning. He called it a debriefing, but Azalea recognized the careful questions, the probing for military intelligence, the assumption that she'd cooperate simply because he outranked everyone else in the room. How many warriors in the camp? I didn't count. Weapons, supplies, defensive positions. I was learning to tan hides, not studying fortifications. His patience wore thin quickly. Military men, Azalea had learned, preferred direct answers to nuanced truths. They wanted information that fit their strategies, not complications that challenged their assumptions. Miss Montgomery, I'm trying to prevent a war. Your cooperation could save lives on both sides. Whose lives matter to you, Colonel? The question caught him off guard. He'd expected gratitude, not interrogation. Compliance, not challenge. All lives naturally. Then why are you mobilizing for attack instead of negotiating for peace? His mask slipped slightly. Behind the professional courtesy, she glimpsed the man who'd already decided on his course of action. The peace bride's return was just convenient. Timing, useful propaganda for decisions already made. That evening, alone in her locked room, Azalea placed her hand on her still flat belly. The pregnancy was barely noticeable, but she felt the change in her body, the subtle shift that spoke of new life growing. She thought of Ayana, wondered if he'd realized her secret before Tsina Ma's attack interrupted her confession. Wondered if he was planning rescue or trusting her to find her own way back. The moon rose beyond her window. Stars appeared in patterns she'd learned to read during long nights on the prairie. Comanche navigation, taught by a grandmother who'd accepted her when her own people had traded her away. Through the thin walls, she heard Colonel Drummond talking with Mayor Blackwood. Their voices carried the confidence of men making important decisions about other people's lives. Attack at dawn, Drummond was saying, while they're conducting their morning prayers. Families gathered, guards relaxed. Will there be survivors? Enough to send a message to the other bands. The frontier needs to be secure for settlement expansion. Azalea pressed her ear to the wall, listening to them plan destruction disguised as pacification. They spoke of her rescue as justification, her suffering as reason for retaliation that had nothing to do with her at all. She was an excuse, not a person, a symbol, not a human being with choices and agency and love growing in her heart. Her literacy, once hidden in shame, now became her secret weapon. She found paper in the preacher's desk, ink from the general store. In the darkness of her room, she began documenting everything she'd learned about Comanche culture, their stories, their wisdom, their humanity. If Drummond succeeded in his dawn attack, someone needed to remember that the people he destroyed were more than obstacles to expansion. They were fathers and mothers, children and grandparents, storytellers and teachers and healers. They were the family she'd chosen and who'd chosen her in return. The writing continued through the night. Page after page of memories, conversations, lessons learned beside cook fires under endless stars. The weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders. She was carrying more than a child now. She was carrying the truth of two worlds, the possibility of understanding, the hope that love could bridge what fear had divided. Dawn approached with the relentless certainty of consequences. Colonel Drummond's attack would launch with the sunrise, targeting people who'd shown her what belonging meant, unless she found the courage to choose what mattered more than her own safety. The window latch yielded to pressure applied with desperate precision. Azalea had learned patience from Sakyo-sama, learned to read the weak points in seemingly solid structures. The wood was old, warped by Texas heat and winter cold. Outside, Fort Esperanza slept under a canopy of stars that seemed closer than they had 3 months ago. The same stars that wheeled over Comanche camps, over the people who would wake to find death riding toward them with the sunrise. Her feet found the ground without sound. Months of moving through camp at night, tending sick children or helping with difficult births had taught her the value of silence, every step placed with intention, every breath measured and controlled. The stable stood at the settlement's edge, horses drowsing in stalls that smelled of hay and leather. Azalea chose the fastest mare, a bay with good legs and steady temperament. Her hands worked the bridle with efficiency born of necessity. The pregnancy made her cautious, aware of the life growing beneath her heart. But caution balanced against urgency, against the knowledge that dozens of people she loved would die if she chose safety over sacrifice. She thought of Ayana's words by the creek that final evening. True love means believing in their strength, not just protecting their weakness. He'd been talking about trust, about partnership, about the courage to let people make their own choices. Now she understood what he meant. The mare responded to subtle pressure, moving away from the settlement with the quiet grace of a creature that understood stealth. They picked their way across the darkened prairie, following stars and memory toward the camp where morning prayers would soon begin. Behind them, Colonel Drummond's forces prepared for dawn. Weapons cleaned, horses saddled, justifications rehearsed. The rescued Peace Bride would provide all the motivation they needed for what came next. Except the Peace Bride had made her own choice. The prairie stretched endlessly in all directions, silver grass catching starlight. Azalea had learned to read this landscape, to find water and shelter and direction in terrain that had once seemed hostile and empty. Now it felt familiar. Home in a way that rooms and walls and locked doors never could. The mare's hooves drummed a steady rhythm against earth that had absorbed the passage of countless generations. Buffalo herds, hunting parties, families moving with the seasons. The land remembered all of it, held all of it, connected all of it in ways that transcended the boundaries people drew on maps. Hours passed. The eastern horizon began to pale, dawn approaching with relentless certainty. Azalea urged the mare faster, knowing that distance and time were racing against each other toward a collision that could not be avoided. She thought of the child she carried, wondered what world would greet this new life. A world divided by fear and misunderstanding, or one bridged by love that recognized no boundaries? The choice lay ahead, in the camp that was still too far away, with the man who had taught her what belonging meant. Smoke appeared on the horizon first, then the familiar shapes of lodges, the careful arrangement that spoke of people who understood their place in the larger pattern: home, family, the future she'd chosen over the safety she'd been offered. Ayana emerged from his lodge as she rode into camp. No surprise in his expression, no questions about how or why. Just recognition of a choice made and honored, a trust fulfilled in both directions. "Drummond comes at dawn," she said, sliding from the mare's back into his arms. "How many?" 50 soldiers. Maybe more." His hands found her face, reading the exhaustion and determination in her features. "You rode all night. I had to warn. You. You had to choose." The distinction mattered. Warning implied obligation, duty, the burden of knowledge that demanded action. Choosing meant agency, power, the freedom to decide what mattered more than personal safety. Around them, the camp stirred to life. Warriors emerging from lodges, weapons appearing in practiced hands, horses being readied for battle or flight, but no panic, no chaos. These were people who understood that survival required clear thinking under pressure. Sakyo Sama appeared at Azalea's side. Gesture. Azalea understood both positions, saw the wisdom and limitation in each approach. She urged her horse forward, placing herself between all three groups: soldiers, peace advocates, and war advocates. All of them convinced they knew the only solution to an impossible situation. "I was given to the Comanche as property," she called out, her voice carrying to all present. "Accepted as a person. Chosen to stay as family. If any of you want to end this cycle of violence, stop seeing each other as enemies and start seeing each other as people with children to protect." Her hand moved to her belly, the gesture visible to everyone present. New life, growing between worlds, carrying the heritage of both, belonging fully to neither and therefore free to bridge both. Colonel Drummond's horse danced nervously beneath him. Military solutions worked best when moral complexities remained simple. when enemies stayed clearly defined, when victory could be measured in territory gained or resistance eliminated. This woman complicated everything. Miss Montgomery, you've been through a terrible ordeal. Your thinking has been affected by your captivity. My thinking has been clarified by my freedom. The distinction hung in the morning air, challenging assumptions that had seemed solid as stone. Sakyo-sama emerged from the camp, walking slowly across the open ground, with the dignity of someone whose years had earned her the right to speak uncomfortable truths. She stopped beside Azalea's horse, placed one weathered hand on the younger woman's leg, and spoke in clear English that surprised everyone present. This child carries both bloods, both stories, both futures. You kill her family, you kill half of what this child could become. The old woman's English was accented but unmistakable. Her meaning cut through political rhetoric and military necessity to the human heart of the conflict. Tsinama's response came swift and harsh in Comanche. Sakyo-sama answered with equal intensity, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd guided the tribe through previous impossible choices. Ayana translated quietly. She tells him that wisdom protects the future, not just the present, that some battles are won through understanding rather than strength. And his response? That understanding doesn't stop bullets. The impasse, stretched taut as bowstring, balanced between competing truths that couldn't be reconciled through force alone. Behind Drummond, his soldiers waited for orders. Behind Tsinama, warriors fingered their weapons. Behind Ayana, families held their breath. Azalea closed her eyes, feeling the child move beneath her heart. When she opened them again, her decision was made. Colonel, what do you see when you look at me? A victim who needs rescue. Tsinama, what do you see? Ayana translated the question and response. A betrayal that weakens our people. Ayana, what do you see? A woman who chose love over fear. A future that includes rather than excludes. She turned back to address all three groups, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who'd learned what truly mattered. I see a child who will grow up knowing that love recognizes worth where others see only difference. That true strength comes from building bridges rather than walls, that the future belongs to those brave enough to choose understanding over easy answers. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. Clouds gathered on the western horizon, promising the kind of storm that washed the prairie clean and left everything growing greener. Drummond lowered his weapon first. Not surrender, but recognition that some situations required solutions his training hadn't provided. Tsinama followed, his warrior's honor acknowledging courage, even when he disagreed with its application. The treaty negotiations that followed took place under an open sky, with Azalea serving as translator for more than language. She helped both sides understand that peace served everyone's children better than endless conflict. 6 months later, during the spring buffalo hunt, Azalea gave birth with Sakyo-sama as midwife and Ayana holding her hand. Their daughter arrived healthy and strong, her first cry carrying across the prairie like a promise of better things to come. As she held her child, Azalea reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From property to person to partner to mother. From survival to belonging to love freely chosen and given. What will you teach her? Ayana asked, his finger tracing their daughter's tiny hand. That she belongs to herself first. That love is about recognition, not possession. That the future is built by people brave enough to choose understanding over fear. The sun set over the prairie, painting the sky in shades of possibility. 3 generations sat together around the fire. Sakyo-sama, holding her great-granddaughter. Azalea and Ayana, hands intertwined, there, her weathered hands checking for injuries, her eyes reading the deeper truths that words couldn't convey. The old woman spoke in rapid Comanche, her voice carrying the authority of someone whose wisdom had guided the tribe through previous crises. Ayana translated. She says you carry the future in your body and the past in your heart. That makes you a bridge between worlds. What does that mean? It means you choose how this ends. The eastern sky continued its inexorable lightning. Dawn would bring Colonel Drummond's attack, would force the confrontation that had been building since the first treaty was signed and broken, since the first promise was made and abandoned. But it would also bring the possibility of something different, something that had never been tried before because it required the kind of courage that came from love, rather than fear. "There's another way," Ayanna said quietly. "Harder than fighting, riskier than running." "What way?" "We meet them in the open. Offer parley. Use your voice to speak truths they need to hear." The suggestion was radical, dangerous, unprecedented. Military men didn't negotiate with people they'd come to destroy. Settlers didn't listen to voices they'd already decided to silence. But sometimes impossible situations demanded impossible solutions. They'll see it as weakness. They'll see it as strength they don't understand. Around them, warriors awaited orders. Families prepared for evacuation. Children were gathered in the center of camp, protected by the bodies of adults who would die before allowing harm to reach them. All of it balanced on the choice of one woman who'd learned what it meant to be valued, what it cost to love freely, what it required to build bridges across chasms that seemed unbridgeable. Azalea placed her hand on her belly, feeling the life that connected her to tomorrow. Then she looked at Ayanna, seeing the man who'd taught her that love was about recognition, not possession. "If we do this, we do it together. Together." The word carried weight, promise, commitment that transcended the crisis bearing down on them. It spoke of partnership forged in understanding, strengthened by respect, made sacred by choice freely, given and received. Dawn broke over the prairie, painting the sky in shades of possibility. Colonel Drummond's cavalry appeared on the horizon, like a dark line drawn against the morning sky. 50 mounted soldiers in formation, weapons gleaming in the early light, riding toward what they expected to be an easy victory over sleeping families. Instead, they found something unprecedented. Ayanna sat motionless on his war horse in the open ground between the camp and the approaching soldiers. Beside him, Azalea held herself straight in the saddle, visibly pregnant, visibly unharmed, visibly there by choice. Behind them, the Comanche camp waited in disciplined silence. No defensive positions, no hidden warriors, no preparation for battle. Just two people offering parley where none had been expected. Drummond raised his hand, halting his column within rifle range but outside immediate striking distance. His eyes swept the scene, reading tactical implications, searching for traps, finding only questions his training hadn't prepared him to answer. The rescued peace bride sat beside her Comanche husband as an equal, not a captive. Her posture spoke of partnership, not coercion. Her presence challenged every assumption that had justified this dawn attack. "Miss Montgomery," Drummond called across the distance. "You're safe now. Come forward." "I am forward, Colonel. This is where I choose to be." The words carried across the prairie grass, witnessed by soldiers who'd expected to find a victim, requiring rescue. Instead, they found a woman claiming agency they hadn't thought to consider. "You've been deceived, manipulated. These people have clouded your judgment. These people have shown me what love looks like." Azalea's voice remained steady, carrying the authority of someone who'd learned the difference between being owned and being cherished. The soldiers shifted in their saddles, uncomfortable with a narrative that didn't match their mission. Behind Drummond's line, movement appeared on the horizon. More riders approaching from the east, but these weren't reinforcements. Tsinama's warband had arrived, drawn by the gathering that would determine the future of their people. The war chief rode forward, stopping near Ayanna, but not beside him. His presence added complexity to an already unprecedented situation. 3 different approaches to the same crisis, represented by 3 leaders who couldn't all be right. "Brother," Tsinama addressed Ayanna, "you would negotiate with those who come to destroy us? I would find a path that protects our children." "There is no path with people who speak treaties while sharpening knives." The exchange happened in Comanche, but the meaning translated clearly through tone and "child" sleeping peacefully between worlds that had learned to honor rather than fear their differences. Home wasn't a place, Azalea had learned. Home was where your worth was recognized, your growth celebrated, your love accepted without condition or reservation. Home was where you were free to become who you were meant to be. And that is all to the story for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.